This week, part 2 of my sit-down interview with Campbell Newman as we deep dive on the Liberal Democrats' new Freedom Manifesto, the party's plan for Australia that they're taking to voters for the 2022 election.
Hopefully people like most of it. If they only like 75% of it, well, frankly, that's a really good outcome as well.
Yeah.
I just say to people that it's time for some important structural changes in Australia. This document is meant to provoke debate. What we want is debate. If we've got it wrong, we'd like to know. We'd like to know why. We'd like to engage with people who want to have the debate. The worst thing is for people to just pull down the shutters and say that's bad. They're terrible people because of X, Y, and Z. Well, there's plenty of good stuff in it. We might not agree with all of it, but it's about trying to find a pathway forward on some of these important issues.
G'day and welcome to episode 76 of The Other Side Australia with Damian Coory. Coming up, the IPA's Evan Mulholland will join me to talk about his podcast series on their ABC and why the national broadcaster really needs massive reform.
Roy Morgan's survey of trusted brands. In the last 2 years, the ABC's fallen from number 5 most trusted brand in Australia to number 19. And to quote Roy Morgan sociologist, risks falling out of the top 20 altogether. And they actually looked at their net rating score over the last 2 years, and it dives significantly in April of 2020. What happened then? The court case of Cardinal George Pell, where the ABC were proven to be on an absolute frolic of their own. Towards the end of last year, when they aired their Four Corners program on Christian Porter and Alan Tudge. And, of course, earlier this year as well, and mid this year, when they got into all sorts of scandals to do with their own making. So every time the ABC seems to have made itself the story, its trust is going down. And I don't think the government can be afraid of this idea that the ABC is somehow really trusted by Australians, because in fact it's sliding and it's not as trusted anymore.
Evan Mulholland, the producer of a new podcast series from the IPA on our precious ABC. Why should a group of out-of-touch elites get $1 billion of your money to play with, accountable really to nobody but themselves? It's utterly ridiculous. That's coming up later. A bit of political news before we get into the show proper today. 2 of the biggest minor political parties in the country have announced that they will be swapping preference recommendations on their how to vote cards. The Liberal Democrats and the United Australia Party leaders held 2 joint news conferences yesterday to announce the preference deal. Of course, you can put preferences in any order that you want to when you vote. But a lot of people do just follow the party how-to-vote cards that are handed out on election day. So this actually does matter. It sees long-time foes, Campbell, Newman and Clive Palmer, putting differences aside in the interests of the bigger picture.
And who would have thought this day would have ever come, Clive?
Well, politics is about ideas.
Yeah, it's about ideas, and it's not about yourself, it's about the country, and that's what we're here to say. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're saying that we're putting behind the disagreements of the past for Australia, because this country right now needs real leadership, and if we're to actually get this country back on track, the minor political parties need to come together to actually cooperate in many different ways to actually give Australia a real future, because we're not going to get the sort of reforms that we need, the sort of new ideas, the progression forward from the major parties, which sadly are completely dominated by political hacks, people who've never had real jobs.
The United Australia Party will be giving the Liberal Democrats our first preference. So we'll say vote 1 United Australia Party, 2 the Liberal Democrats in the Senate and the House of Representatives as well. And I think by working together we can achieve the extraordinary, Campbell.
Thanks, Clive. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Liberal Democrats released a very important policy manifesto just over a week ago. It's called the Freedom Manifesto. It's on our website. It contains great ideas to take this country forward. I want to thank Clive for this agreement. There might be more things that we will do together in the upcoming campaign. And I also want to stress, though, that we intend to work closely with other minor parties as well. That's very important. So the hand, if I could put out, the hand of friendship is out to them in the interests of Australia, because it's through that cooperation, through working together, that we can actually teach these major parties a lesson and really let Australians, the quiet Australians, have a real say in the upcoming election.
Many of our people joining our party are former Liberals. I'm sure the same is true with Liberal Democrats and former Labor people and former Greens, because some of the issues at stake at this election are not ideologically only. It's talking about freedom, and freedom really can't be given to you by politicians. It's been earned in Australia at places like Beersheba, at Gallipoli, in the Kokoda Trail, at Trabuc. No politician and no government should be able to take away your freedom. I'm very happy to shake Campbell's hand and say, let's get on with it. In the 1960s, it was make love, not war. In the 1940s, Winston Churchill said, jaw is better than war. And it is. But unfortunately, we're in a war at the moment.
Yeah.
It's a war we have to win, because what's at stake are the rights of our citizens, the freedoms we enjoy, and the future of the country.
That's Campbell Newman, the Liberal Democrats' lead Senate candidate for Queensland, and Clive Palmer, the founder of the UAP, speaking in Brisbane. All right, two big interviews coming up. Part 2 of my chat last week with Campbell Newman, and Evan Mulholland from the IPA will join me afterwards for a deep dive on the ABC and how to reform it. This is one of our biggest shows ever, maybe the biggest. But I want to start this episode with a bit of an important announcement and a very big thank you to everyone who watches or listens and has been watching or listening throughout the year. To all of you who engage with me on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, thank you. I am sorry that I can't always get back to you and follow up. This is a part-time hobby and I have a full-time job too, so it is quite hard to respond to everyone as much as I like, or as I would like to. But I do read everything that you send me. I set this show up in 2022 as a platform to amplify the voices of what I believe are the quiet majority in Australia. People who believe in traditional liberalism and democratic principles that are centuries old. Ordinary, middle-of-the-road, common-sense Aussies who, in the cultural battle between the very powerful and deeply entrenched far left and a very small number of extreme crazies on the far right even, feel like the world has gone a bit mad and there's something wrong with them. There isn't. It's not us, it's them. Our government and corporate culture is sliding into a woke hell of neo-Marxist identity politics. It's divisive, it's sexist, it's racist, and it's polarizing people. And they call it anti-racism, anti-sexism. So it's no wonder we're all going a bit crazy with it all. But you know, no matter how much I want to throw things at the TV, I know that most Aussies are actually very sane, very kind, very good people. That most of our immigrants are good people with strong family values and a high work ethic, as they have always been. That most men in this country are gentlemen who treat women with great respect and regard them as different but fully equal. That most women are not man-hating victims. That most gay people feel they can live safely and be themselves, and they don't need to constantly flaunt their sexuality as if that is all that defines them as human beings. I believe that most people protesting in Victoria understand deeply the implications of the horrific rules that have been introduced by their far-left ideological socialist government that isn't the old Labor Party of Hawke and Keating that we could disagree with but respect. They are not all pushing gallows around at protests, nor do they support the extremists who are. I believe that most people do care about the environment, but don't want to see us shoot ourselves in the foot with regulations in Australia that aren't going to help the planet one bit, will send our electricity and petrol prices through the roof, and may end up killing people in developing nations. Australia is a good country. We are mostly a very good people. This show is for you. We are a centre-right show focused on classical liberal principles, the rights of the individual, that the best thing for the collective, for everybody, is to let all the individuals be their individual best, and In turn, that will naturally help everybody else and lift the country. Simple, basic, old-fashioned, common sense Aussie values. So for that reason, this show has long been a friend of the new emerging and growing political force in this country, the Liberal Democrats. I share their values. I want to give them time to be heard so you can hear the other side, the other point of view, the side that just isn't talked about enough by the mainstream media. The Liberal Democrats, or LibDems for short, are a political party now attracting a lot of disenchanted classical Liberal Party members. They're a party that speaks to people in the centre, the people who don't identify as right-wing perhaps, and who probably wouldn't vote for Clive's UAP or Pauline Hanson's One Nation, but are nonetheless completely disillusioned, like so many of us are, with both the major parties and the terrible state that Canberra is now in, full of career politicians and career bureaucrats making too many rules and regulations that are holding the rest of us back. I believe this party, the Liberal Democrats, and the next election might be our last chance to send a very big message to the major parties before the media control and surveillance control maybe gets too big to fight. Now, some of you might be thinking that that's an overstatement, but I lived through the fall of Hong Kong, and I can tell you, the tipping point creeps up on you slowly, and when it falls very fast. So for all these reasons, folks, I'm announcing today that this will be the second last episode of The Other Side for a while. Next week will be our last episode for the year. Then we'll have a few summer series episodes, best of highlights from throughout the year to take us through to the end of December. And this is because in 2022, I've decided to run for office as the Liberal Democrats candidate for the federal seat of Ryan in Queensland, that's in Brisbane's western suburbs. This may be the dumbest decision I've ever made, since I'm far from an admirer of politicians, but I think this is the time to do stuff, not to just sit back and cop it. It's certainly the time to get behind people who are actually doing things like Campbell, Newman and John Ruddick and David Limbrick, and who give a damn about more than just their own political careers. They're doing this for the country. They're doing this because they believe in classical liberal values and freedom and liberty, and they see what's happening to the current Liberal Party. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, after the election, I'll come back, I hope, with The Other Side once again. We will need to get some backers for the show now that Discernable is going its own way, but I think we probably will. We'll see what happens there. But in the meantime, while the campaign's going on, I'd like you to please keep following me on social media at Other Side Oz on Twitter and on Instagram. And you can search up our Facebook and YouTube pages at The Other Side Australia. Remember to put the Australia, or you'll get all sorts of things. I will be posting short video editorials and comments throughout the campaign. So I will no doubt be producing quite a fair bit of stuff still. So I'm not going away completely, but I just can't keep donating 2 days of my time a week to do this show while I've got to focus on the election campaign and my family and my job. So a lot going on. This is a sort of all I can volunteer. So I need to put all my focus into the campaign, because I really think this is it, Australia, and I really think we need to get on and fix the country. It's the frustration coming back to Australia, seeing, after living overseas, seeing how great this place is and the potential, and noticing that the potential is not being realised. When was the last time you saw an Australian politician stand up and say, I have this vision for our country. I want to help business grow. I want to help Australia become a world leader in something. I want Australia to extend itself into the world and be big and great and strong and be able to stand up to bullies in the region like China and unite with other like-minded countries like Japan and Taiwan and the Philippines, and, even support poor old Hong Kong, what's left of it. So, I want to see leaders who have a vision. I want to see leaders who think like business people, who want to grow things, who want to make things, who want to improve our economy so that our kids have something. They will get jobs because the way things are going at the moment, where we've just got career politicians only worrying about their own careers and making ridiculous decisions locking people away from their families for no health or medical reasons. That is what I want to change. That is what I want to see change in this country. I want to see real great visionary leaders. I don't like a lot of what Clive Palmer says, for example. I'm not the sort of person that would ordinarily vote for Clive Palmer. But I would put Clive Palmer ahead of a lot of other people right now because he's a business person. He's got some ideas, he's got some vision, he's got a proven track record in business, and he wants to do something. He cares about the country. He doesn't just care about Clive Palmer's political career. I'm more of a Liberal Democrat, I'm more in the sort of centre right, and just want to get back to those ordinary Aussie values. And I want to see small business. I'm more interested in small business people being given a fair go and getting out there. We've looked after the rights of the worker in this country. We haven't looked after the rights of small business people taking risks and their rights to actually get rid of bad employees, right? For the sake of the good employees, the good workers, and the sake of the business and where they have to put their profits. Being told that they can't pay this hard-working person more because they've got to keep paying this person who bludgers and doesn't show up for work on time and that sort of thing. So I want to get back to ordinary, leave it alone, let people run their own show. Let's get government out of the way. And as Ronald Reagan said, government isn't the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. And while government has a place and it does some good things, a lot of what our government's doing and a lot of this nanny state control of every little thing we do, well, it's just reached point ridiculous, as you know, how I feel about that, given COVID. So that's why I'm running. It's going to be interesting. I've never done it before, so it'll be a lot of fun. So we'll have a good time with it. I'm determined to enjoy myself. But if you do live in the electorate of Ryan in Brisbane, that's the inner western suburbs, and the outer western suburbs out to Brookfield and places like that, and you want to help out, please do get in touch with me. Anyway, I just want to let you all know that in full disclosure before I presented part 2 of my discussion with Liberal Democrat Senate candidate Campbell Newman that I recorded last week. Campbell Newman was Queensland's only non-Labor Premier for almost a quarter of a century. He will be soon at a quarter of a century because Labor are now in power for a few more years. He lost office after taking on the public service and the unions to try to get state government spending under control and the state government running efficiently on budget. He wanted to prevent the debt burden that Labor has now produced for Queensland, $100 billion, I think Queensland's in debt or more. And Queenslanders, it's young Queenslanders, right? It's if you're a young Queenslander out there or a young Australian, you guys are the ones who have to pay off all these crazy debts. So you should be concerned about this stuff. Now, despite having a successful business at 58 years of age, Newman has decided to return to politics because he's horrified by the demise of real liberalism in Australia and the general attack on liberty that we've seen throughout the COVID crisis. I spoke to Campbell in depth last week in episode 75. If you haven't caught up on that, you might want to watch that. We talked about the party's newly released Freedom Manifesto. It's 10 points to help really keep Australia strong and safe. And this is part 2 of our conversation. Campbell, thanks again for your time. This is an extraordinary time for Australia, and I want to have a talk about some of the things in the Liberal Democrats' Freedom Manifesto that deal with, things like free speech, things like surveillance and privacy, because the technology in the world these days is getting pretty scary in terms of what data can be gained on everybody and how that can be manipulated by a bad actor in government. And I want to just, somebody who's been a premier of a state, I'd like to get your perspective on what's going on in Victoria with Dan Andrews. I mean, I know he comes from the left faction of the Labor Party, so he is very left-wing. But this is some pretty wacky stuff that we're seeing, quite extreme police state sort of...
Yeah.
Has there ever been anything like this before in Australia? I mean, like not even
never
Joe Bjelke-Bisney or in Queensland.
No. And look, the left carried on about Joe all the time, but the tactics that have been used against protesters in Victoria, the use of baton rounds and pepper spray, a number of quite terrifying incidences of police brutality, police overreaction, heavy-handed arrests, coupled then with this latest legislation that the Premier wants to make himself sort of the Emperor of Victoria. the silence of the left and the normal sort of civil liberties people.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre. And clearly the Victorian police have been politicised. I mean, this is a police service that couldn't deal with youth gangs in Melbourne prior to COVID, has allowed gang warfare to run riot at the streets of Melbourne through the 90s and early 2000s, who then compromised those prosecutions with quite outrageous, sort of perversions of the course of justice, if I can sort of maybe misuse the term, but stuff that's now pretty well documented. I mean, what is going on in Victoria and the police? And now we're hearing about the red shirts. There was an investigative piece by one of the newspapers on the weekend. Yep. The claim is that there would have been 16 Victorian MPs that would have been prosecuted, but internally someone on high in the police has said, you're not going after them. Now, in Queensland, ironically, post Fitzgerald today, the idea that there'd be that sort of interference would itself lead to, triple C sort of investigations and hearings and all that sort of stuff. And I'm pretty confident that Queensland would deal with it better today than no sort of thought to deal with it in Victoria. So those are just a few thoughts, but it is police state stuff and they haven't covered themselves in glory. But just sort of then broadening it out, what's going on elsewhere? Well, I just reflect that when I was in my 20s, I went on my first ever, and I've only been on two, my first ever protest on the streets of Brisbane. And I marched in 1987 against the Australia card ID, national ID system that the Hawke government wanted to bring in. Yep. And a guy called John Howard, that John Howard, leader of the Liberal Party, opposed that. And ultimately, the Hawke government backed down. That was the Liberal Party in 1987. 34 years later, what's this Liberal Party, after this Prime Minister, doing? Bringing in national identity, digital identity legislation. Yep. This is a party that brought in legislation. It's been passed with the support of Labor, legislation that allows police services and intelligence agencies, not with a warrant from a judge, but with an order from the Australian Administrative Appeals Tribunal.
Oh, okay.
So not a warrant, not a real judge.
A bureaucratic order.
Or someone who might have been a political appointee, by the way, can go in and hack into your social media and actually change stuff. And they say that it's for dealing with serious pedophiles and da-da-da-da. But I can tell you now, having been in government, these things will be misused. And so another black mark against the Morrison government. And the final one, more probably not as a serious one, but again, one that's worthy of comment. In the last 2 weeks, new legislation that's been passed, which I'd never heard anything about. My local member, Mr. Trevor Evans, never consulted me about it. I wonder if the member for Ryan consulted you, Julian Simmons. But we now, as company directors, have to get a director's ID. We have to be ID'd. We have to have a number. Wow. Yep. Why is that? Well, the reason is apparently there are people phoenixing companies, whether they set up a company, incur debts, put it into liquidation, do it all again. So you and I and all the law-abiding company directors suddenly have to sort of queue up to be part of the data matching deep state because of a Liberal Party that's lost its way. It is quite disgraceful. I was at a lunch today and I put this on the table. Amazing. Business people, top of their game. Quite a few people knew nothing about it. So, how much consultation? Why is the Liberal Party giving the power to ASIC and the ATO to do these things? This is about data matching. This is about surveillance of business. And ultimately, again, it will be used for other purposes other than the ones for which these nongs put it up.
I'm astounded too by the Labor Party. I mean, what has happened to their commitment to, freedom and civil liberties? And I'm constantly amused by the fact that suddenly, Big Pharma is the hero of the Labor Party.
Oh, yeah. Well, exactly. And all these stories in the media, we talked about the media before. I mean, like I just reflect on how many times that I've seen politicians, even myself, accused of conflicts of interest. And it's been the first story in the news, and we've been smashed, or they've been smashed. Well, that's sort of okay, mouth shut, to be quite earthy about it, compared to what's going on now, where there is massive sums of money at stake, and huge conflicts of interest, and motivations to do things, and recommend courses of treatment that have just not been critically examined by politicians, bureaucrats, or the media.
Yeah. And also the question of just public grants and things like that. Is there anything in the manifesto about the way that we empower bureaucrats to spend money, and the way that we more or less, pork barrelling? Can we end pork barrelling?
Well, that's a really interesting one. I have perhaps a different view on that, and we haven't really covered that. I suppose the first thing overall is that there needs to be far greater scrutiny in terms of the levels of expenditure, because there's a lot of wasteful spending in those sort of areas. But I'd say this, at the end of the day, I'd prefer the politicians to be making decisions on the allocation of these monies rather than bureaucrats. If I'm voting for you as my local member, Damian, I want you to fight for my area, for the local school, the local park, if it's a council, for the road upgrade, the rail overbridge. So
in a sense, you should be doing that, right?
Well,
you should be pushing for that.
It's it's a bit, people, one person's pork barrelling is someone else's great outcome for the community that they fought for.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a process, but at the end of the day, I think politicians should be in charge of that process. And the ultimate arbiters of something bad happen, the media are covering it, but the community make a decision in the ballot box. If you don't like what they've done, by the way, I'll let you in a secret. I'll let all the viewers know. Politicians are just as well placed to make these decisions as bureaucrats. The smart people are not necessarily the bureaucrats. No, they're not.
I know.
They don't.
We seem to laud the bureaucrats these days.
The bureaucrats don't have the tablets of stone from the mountain. They don't have that. Yeah.
So, as a former premier, I want to get your opinion on where you think the psychology of Dan Andrews is at the moment. What is he doing, and honestly, why is he doing this?
I don't get it. I mean, I always was very sceptical when he was leader of the opposition. I used to watch him some nights on TV when I had a bit of time on my hands in Parliament. I'd watch his press conferences as the leader of the opposition. He always had a plan for jobs. He was allowed to repeat that mantra again and again and again. He had no plan, and I marked him out as a Royal Gold.
He paints himself as an infrastructure guy.
Yeah, I marked him out as a Royal Gold sort of, BS artist back then. But now he's really shown signs of megalomania, and he must be stopped in terms of Victorians need to protest in the streets, they need to write letters, they need to get onto social media, they need to talk to the local media, they need to mobilise their friends, their families, their work colleagues, and they need to actually send a message to this guy.
And what you've just said
is enough.
What you've just said is illegal in Victoria.
Enough's enough. Well, we saw a great turnout.
You could be arrested. If we were in Victoria, we're not.
Yeah, well, I'm not going. Well, and by the way, I'll tell you one thing. In my little business, where we're involved in funds management and property, we won't invest in Victoria because you don't know what he's going to do next.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you do not know.
And this is what happens.
You do not know what the guy's going to. Yeah, you
do
not know. He's shown that he's prepared to be totally ruthless. To just, if he can get away with it, he will just trample on anybody. It doesn't matter. So, again, the only way that he will be stopped is ultimately the ballot box. But Victorians need to send a message to him right now. Enough's enough.
Yeah. What's happened in Victoria?
But again, our Prime Minister, one of the key reasons I left the Liberal National Party, in terms of an immediate, I had enough. He's the leader of that party. He can't even bring himself to criticise Dan Andrews. He goes to Remembrance Day services and sits beside him. When you allow this stuff to go on, you don't call it out, that you don't well, you don't even call it out, but you're not even prepared to actually raise the prospect of legislation using the external affairs powers on international treaties we've signed, which could be triggered. When you're prepared to do that, then you're backing the guy. And I'm sick of Morrison backing Dan Andrews.
I think a lot of people are getting sick of him. All right, so let's look at the other premiers. The other Labor premiers that have been high profile and causing a bit of trouble. I've got a theory about this. I think that McGowan and Palaszczuk, I mean, Western Australia and Queensland are the battleground states of this coming federal election, right? Mm-hmm. If McGowan and Palaszczuk refuse to open the borders, they're going to box ScoMo into a corner, right? They're looking for a fight here, so they can perhaps get him to, put him in a position where he has to say, sorry, we're opening up, right? And it does come to a showdown. And, Queensland and Western Australia are probably our most parochial states. I mean, the people in Queensland like to be Queenslanders, and we don't like being told what to do by Canberra, and certainly the West Australians don't. Hi to everybody in Perth. That's a narrative that's worked very well for Palaszczuk and for McGowan in the state elections that we've seen in the last 12 months. So, why wouldn't they push it through to the... So,
well, I can't speak for WA, I don't know enough about the politics over there and how it might play out. But for Queensland, I'd just make the observation, I think potentially can backfire on Anastasia Palaszczuk, and it's because of the comparison. Because people in Sydney can now fly overseas and do things, whereas people in Queensland really can't. Okay, so that ultimately will really build up, and there'll be pressure on her, and I think people will get jack on. The penny will drop. It will start with the tourism sector, who can't. Why would you come to Queensland? Like, how can you come to Queensland? How can you?
But it can't.
It's silly. I've got a young relative.
It's easier to go overseas.
I've got a young relative who's graduating, and there's a ceremony, and she's interstate at her, tertiary institution at the start of December. Well, I can't go. Oh, but they'll say you could go. Well, hang on. No, double vaxxed. Got to do 14 days home quarantine when I come home. I mean, what is the point, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, doesn't that just show that it's insane? I've been vaccinated. Well, actually, again, I guess that proves that they know that you can spread the virus.
Yeah, we just heard Jordan Peterson saying exactly that.
So
what's going on?
Oh, it's out of the bag. Yeah. The big secret. So, I think that just demonstrates that you can't, I still can't travel to see my relatives interstate. I can't do it. So meanwhile, I'm seeing people jump on planes and fly off. So I think people will get jack of that eventually. So maybe the Premier thinks it's great politics. I think it ultimately unravels. But you know how it could unravel more quickly? If the PM took a stand. I know I keep coming back to this. This bloke will never engage with the problem that he won't just walk past. I mean, it's just unbelievable. His MPs, where are they? Stand up, fight this. Queensland MPs and senators, stand up and call this out.
I want to call out a couple of things.
Stop being patsies for this. Stop giving the Premier And as for the state opposition, David Crisafulli, would you please stand up? Stand up and be counted. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, now, I noticed that ScoMo's been adopting some of your lines. So the Australian way was a Liberal Democrats sort of slogan you had going there for a little while, and all of a sudden it became ScoMo. Everything was the Australian way, and we were getting flyers and things saying the Australian way this, the Australian way that. And I heard him at the Victorian Chamber of Commerce last week, and it's can do this, can do that, which of course to Queensland audience would know that that's your can do Campbell and can do Newman. That's been your motto for quite some time, going back to your mayoral days.
I guess the lines...
What does this mean?
What does it mean? It means this. It means it must have tested well in the focus groups.
Yeah, because that's all they look at is the polling.
That's all he knows.
Yeah.
That's
marketing.
all this guy knows.
Scotty from market research.
Well, you can't carry coal into the parliament, and so don't be scared, don't be frightened. Well, mate, I bet he wouldn't do it now. Come on. It's just like...
So I'm thinking he might
Yeah,
do a big switcheroo in the next few months and become Superman.
1,000 kilometres wide, 1 centimetre deep.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? And I think some people have said to me, well, maybe he'll start showing. He tends to do that right at the very end. He will come out. We've seen it a couple of times where he's come out and taken control at the end, and everyone thinks, oh, here he is. The spine is back. He's going to represent the quiet Australians who voted him in. And then he disappoints.
Well,
again,
maybe he'll
right?
do. Maybe he'll
but
do
I
it.
think people are sick of it. I think the credibility's gone, and there's no trust there.
I'm very torn.
No one's going to buy it this time.
I'm very torn. To be crystal clear, I don't want Anthony Albanese to be the next Prime Minister. I'd like Prime Minister Scott Morrison to be a better Prime Minister.
Yes.
To be faithful to the values of the Liberal Party.
Yes.
To stand up for the people who elected him. To protect us from globalists who are intent on inflicting incredible economic damage on us in terms of our oil and gas and agricultural exports. I wish he would make a stand. He shouldn't, if he shouldn't have gone to Glasgow. If he did go, given that he did go to Glasgow, he should have gone to Glasgow and said, we're not doing this stuff, and this is why, because it's wrong. We feed other countries and millions of people. Our exports actually, provide energy and shelter for millions of people, and we need that.
And we don't need an elite class of global bureaucrats telling the whole world what they can have, including the poor.
Well, when you say, by the way, it's the same people. It's the same people talking about COVID, telling you what you can't do and what you must do, and it's the same ones now telling you that you can't eat meat and you can't have a coal industry and you can't fly, but. Well, I'll see you chaps later. I'm just going to jump into the jet and fly back to Florida to the estate.
It's disgusting. Yep, it was quite a show, wasn't it? It was quite a show of hypocrisy, and it could have all been done on Zoom, since these are the people who put us all on Zoom.
Yes, exactly.
For so long.
It could have been done on Zoom.
All right, the Freedom Manifesto. I do want to, before we, there it is, folks, the Freedom Manifesto, and it's on...
ldp.org.au/freedom. /freedom. ldp.org.au/freedom.
Great. Recall elections.
This is a great
one.
That's
a cutie. So we've done freedom from COVID alarmism. We've got debt and deficit we've talked about. Low flat taxes we've talked about. Voluntary superannuation, you can read about that one. Small business we've talked about. Cheap and reliable energy. Decentralised education.
We haven't talked about that. We should talk about that one.
Have a chat about that one. Free speech and freedom from surveillance goes. That's just going to be a commitment to ensure that
there's some real
policies are supported.
meaty initiatives in there, but we've sort of covered the philosophy of that.
All right, so let's just talk about recall elections and decentralised education. Recall elections. This is the California style where they tried to recall their governor, their equivalent of a premier, Gavin Newsom. It didn't work, but it does. It is a system under which you can essentially get a bit of a petition going, right? And you can have the premier recalled.
Well, you've got to sort of devise the way that this will work in detail in an Australian context. But the essence of it is, as you've said, that if you get a certain number of signatures from registered electors who are intent on demanding there be another election. If you reach a certain threshold, it might be 100,000 or 200,000 voters in a particular a state, say, that then they're forced by law to hold another election. The benefit of that is for people like, say, Daniel Andrews, it might focus the mind. That suddenly he thinks, well, I just push this as hard as I can, as far as I can, and I need to step back. It forces them to blink. So we're proposing it as an initiative to actually get better outcomes, a more accountable political class in this country. Another thing we're also suggesting is that elections should be voluntary.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's a bit that's a bit controversial as well in this country. But also another one we're proposing is a citizens' right of veto on legislation. So these are high level concepts.
Citizens' right of veto.
Yeah.
So how would that work?
Well, certain legislation that's put up can be again subject to some sort of
petition,
be then voted on by the public. Now,
right.
This isn't exactly the same thing, but Switzerland, and it is a federation over there,
right.
They have a particular model about how they go about some of these things. It's quite interesting. We could learn a lot from that.
Okay.
And the point is, I was complaining to you before about this director ID thing. Again, I have never been consulted about that.
Yeah.
I found business people today, the top of their game, serious people around this town in Brisbane, who were totally unaware of it. Others only knew about it because their accountants or lawyers had sent them an email recently saying, "Did you know this is now in?" So those are just those are examples of where we haven't been consulted, and I'd question why that's there. So
there was a phrase in here, turning the public or the voters into like a third chamber. The citizens become the third chamber of Parliament in a sense, so that things can be. There is a recourse mid-term, and this is why I think it's what makes me a sort of a competitive free market liberal, is that I like the idea that money is voting. When you spend, you're voting for the things that you want. You're buying stuff that is providing value, and you're making there are millions of decisions made by every Australian every day in terms of what they're buying and what services they value, that directs the market to produce more of that stuff, right? And it's the free market's a very democratic system, and we don't teach that well enough at school. I don't think enough people really understand how that works. Well, if we can make the political system a little bit more accountable, so it's not just once every 4 years, once every 3 years, but we've got a situation where at least there's that threat that if you do push it too far, then the citizenry can get a bit of a...
Well, look, there's been a lot of debate in Queensland probably in the last 10 to 15 years about, we should go to longer terms. So they went to 4-year terms. Well, I'm wondering what a whole lot of people out there today are thinking about, gee, we've got to wait another 3 years for the next election.
Yeah.
With this government, with the things they've done, with their position we were talking about before, say the borders, wouldn't you like to be able to have a recall election? More importantly, if Anastasia Palaszczuk and her ministry knew that there could be a recall election, they might think twice about the things they're doing. So it might not be something that's used too often, but it certainly would have a powerful impact on the psychology of those in political office. Having been there, I can promise you that. Promise you that.
Okay.
Hey, by the way, one thing we didn't cover, which is not quite in that thing, is quite important, is we've got a proposal there for a constitutional amendment, the Australian Constitution,
right,
modelled on the US article, which is about free speech. So it's very much modelled on
the First Amendment.
Yeah, the First Amendment, what it says about free speech there, and actually really just lifting that and whacking it in ours. And I think there's some really strong arguments again about what we've seen in the last few years in this country, and it's worked pretty well in America, and
it's necessary in this day and age, isn't it? It really is frightening.
It could fit in quite nicely, and for those who are watching going, "Oh, America," but well, hang on, our Senate is modelled on the American Senate to a fair extent, with a bit of a fusion of the House of Lords as well in the UK and processes. House of Representatives. Again, it's there's a lot of things that were lifted at Federation from the US system.
The idea that America is, this mess, or there's all these problems, we see only the problems. That's what gets covered.
There's a lot of good things as well.
There's a hell of a lot of good things in America, and there still is a hell of a lot of good things.
Hey, I'll try this on you.
I'd rather have a messy-free environment.
I have a Chinese friend, and she's in China at the moment seeing her family, but she's made the remark that, the Chinese authorities treat the need for families to get together during this COVID thing more compassionately than Australia. Ponder that.
Wow.
So again, the Chinese Communist Party regime has a more enlightened and benign way of dealing with families needing to reunite if a family member is sick and trying to get a permit to get into the country or see them or whatever than Australia. That's frightening. And I've got a friend who spent time in Switzerland and just came back after being overseas for 3 or 4 years, brought his family back. He's now wondering why he did it. He thinks they had more freedom, in Switzerland.
Yeah. Well, the in Chinese culture, the family is a very, very highly regarded value, and I think if the government tried to do anything that diminished that, there would be unrest and concern. So I think that's the sort of, the response is what's probably frightening them there. But yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. But I am very surprised to hear that we in Australia are not. Well, I'm just shocked. I've been shocked for a year and a half now. I'm starting to get used to being shocked, which in itself is a bit of a problem.
It is. That's how they do you over.
Yeah. Nice and slow.
Yeah, they do you slowly. There's the old saying about boiling the frog, if you've heard that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you wanted to talk about education, because I think this is...
What's the last one we haven't covered? Decentralised education.
Yeah, well, look, this is a cracker. And I think there are many, many parents and indeed grandparents out there, people watching, who are deeply concerned about what's happening in education.
Yep.
We had a coalition government for 8 years, and finally, they must have got a focus group, or a poll, and Tudge, the education minister, started carrying on about the curriculum. Well, it's more than the curriculum. The national curriculum is a disaster because it's full of ideology and social conditioning.
Well, again, it's a bunch of bureaucrats deciding what's right for everybody.
Yeah,
right.
Look,
let the market.
So we're
decide.
saying the national curriculum should go. The states should have their own curriculum. There should be competition between the states in terms of how they devise these things. But most importantly, schools get to decide. We want our kids to be able to read, write, add up. We'd like them to know a bit about the history of the world and what the capital of France is. We want them to know some history, particularly we want them to know some Australian history. We want them to be good citizens. We want them to be proud of our country. And we want them to have the foundations to then go and do either technical and vocational training or go on to university. That's what we want. We don't need them to become trained as eco-warriors or have particular, sort of ideological sort of frameworks belted into them. We don't need that. So, really our framework is about trying to get that back to normal. And so the shame of a coalition government is after 8 years, they have done nothing about this. Some of the other important things are we want to see the funding go to the student. Okay, so we're talking about a voucher system. Education unions are going to hate this. The Labor Party will oppose it. Well, I'll say preemptively, Julia Gillard devised the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and the concept there, the core concept is the person with a disability gets the funding.
Yes.
Why not students in the education system? So to you in the Labor Party, you haven't got a leg to stand on anymore. For you in the education unions, get out of the way and let parents decide how they want their kids to be educated. So then the money goes with the child. So when the parents put the child, that's where the money goes. Schools that deliver for parents, and importantly for kids, they will be the ones that attract the students. Those that don't, they will wither on the vine.
They'll be the ones that will attract the teachers too. The best teachers will go to the...
Yes. Okay.
And the parents will have a choice, and teachers will be motivated then to... And we can pay the good teachers more, and we can get the bad teachers out of the system, and they might change their ways, some of them. Because I think we can all remember from our school days that there are good and bad teachers.
Now, when
right?
I was premier, we brought on a thing called independent public schools, and frankly, we should have gone harder and faster on that, because I can tell you now, parents loved it. So, for example, the Milton State School here in Brisbane became an IPS school. Another one was the Astro State School.
Right?
A level of autonomy, their own little school board, special funding as well. Again, the education unions hated it. It ended up that the principals and the senior teaching staff loved it, and I think that then started to permeate through the school.
Right.
The parents loved it.
Yeah.
Now, the Labor government have been trying to get rid of these things to limited success, but they've been on a jihad against it, and there has been resistance from the school communities, but we need more of that.
These are big unions though, Campbell, as you well know, right? They're hard to take on. They're teachers' unions.
But they have to be taken on because they're not, the results speak for themselves. They're lousy results. And again, more money, by the way, more money is not the answer. The right
better use of it.
Better use of the money, quality teaching, teachers being required to perform is where we need to go. And teachers, and principals need to be held to account for their outcomes. This is the way to get them
and
to be held to account.
Teachers work hard. I mean, there are some fantastic teachers out there, and they should be rewarded.
They're fantastic teachers, but I say to teachers who think, oh, hang on, you're a bit, Newman's down on me. Well, hang on a second. You're teaching professionals. The curriculum is bull. It is full of stuff. It's crammed. But again, what do we need? Read, write, add up, know some history, know some geography. I missed it before. Know some science. Love Australia and our culture. Be prepared to be citizens of this country, understand our democratic system.
Can we teach some free market economics as well?
Maybe even a bit
good,
about managing your money, but we don't need a whole lot. We don't need to be, taught about Gaia and global warming. Global warming doesn't have to be injected into every damn subject.
No.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. So, there's plenty of space for teachers.
If you have a free system like this, you can have schools like that.
What I say to teachers again,
parents who want to send their kids to those schools can send them to those schools.
Well, what I'm saying to teachers is, don't you want to work in a system where you're unshackled from a terrible curriculum?
And the bureaucracy of that curriculum, and the paperwork teachers have got to do.
I don't think I made the point. One thing the teachers might like, we're for getting rid of NAPLAN.
Yeah.
That might surprise people, but we don't think it's delivering anything like it's meant to. It's engendering the wrong behaviours, the wrong outcomes. Let's just get teachers to get on and teach.
Yep.
Let parents and kids decide how the school's going.
Yeah, let the market do its thing with the voucher system,
Yep.
with the government funding. All right. Well, I think that just about covers everything, Campbell. Thank you very much for coming on and explaining the Freedom Manifesto to us.
Thank you for having me, and again, thank you to the viewers today. Hopefully, people like most of it. If they only like 75% of it, well, frankly, that's a really good outcome as well.
Yeah.
I just say to people that it's time for some important structural changes in Australia. This document is meant to provoke debate. What we want is debate. If we've got it wrong, we'd like to know. We'd like to know why. We'd like to engage with people who want to have the debate. The worst thing is for people to just pull down the shutters and say that's bad. They're terrible people because of X, Y, and Z. Well, there's plenty of good stuff in it. We might not agree with all of it, but it's about trying to find a pathway forward on some of these important issues.
Well, I've been very impressed with the Liberal Democrats and where you guys are moving. I think it's fantastic. I know this show is a little biased because we are a show about liberty and democracy, so it's a kind of natural fit with the party there. But I do think this is exactly what Australia needs right now. I know a lot of people are very excited about what's happening with the Liberal Democratic Party, the LibDems, the Liberal Democrats. So I can only say that I wish you all the best in the election, and would love to have you come back and chat to us again before as things heat up, I guess, early next year.
Thanks for the opportunity.
When do you reckon it's going to be, by the way?
Oh, I don't know, April, May, whatever.
All right. Well, we'll catch you sometime before then.
See you then, mate.
Thanks a lot, Campbell. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the other side will be sadly leaving the Discernable platform at the end of 2021, hopefully returning somewhere in 2022 after the election on our own platforms, in which I'll be now running in the federal election, of course, as a Liberal Democrats candidate for the seat of Ryan in Brisbane. And I'm running to win because we have to bring real experience from outside of the political inner circle of Canberra elites to save this country. During the election campaign, I'll be posting lots of random short videos and commenting on stuff. So right now, if you'd please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at TheOtherSideOz and/or on Facebook at facebook.com/TheOtherSideOz, or just search us up. Then be sure to click follow on Twitter to follow us and like on the Facebook page. The Facebook page looks like this. Now, we do strongly recommend that you continue to follow Discernible. Matt's still going to be producing some great stuff on both YouTube and Facebook. But if you're landing on a page that says Discernible, it isn't actually The Other Side anymore. So we do need you to go onto our own separate page. So you've got to find those pages. Be sure to stay in touch with me throughout 2022. It's going to be a lot of fun during the campaign. I'll be posting behind the scenes stuff so you can see what a campaign is like. And then if you could kindly subscribe to us on YouTube, our YouTube page looks like this one. And again, you need to find our page, not our folder on the Discernible page. You've got to find the Other Side Australia page and subscribe directly to that and click the bell so you get notified when we put up new content. I really look forward to keeping in touch throughout 2022. And don't forget that you can always join our VIP WhatsApp list and have links sent to your phone when I upload new content. Just drop us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost@gmail.com, and we'll send you the link to opt in on WhatsApp. Well, we talk a lot about the Australian Broadcasting Corporation on this show, as most of you who've been fans of The Other Side for a while would know. I'm a former employee of the ABC. I did work there for almost a year and a half, I think, back in the very late 1980s, of course. I'm not that old, but no, I'm that old. And it was probably not one of the better places that I've worked in my life, I've got to say. And mainly because you notice when you work in the public service environment that there's no commercial pressure. And because there's no commercial pressure, everything becomes about sucking up, basically. And if you want to get ahead, you've got to sort of say the right things, do the right things. So the currency is very different because you don't have the ratings to kind of determine, whether or not what you're doing is on the right track or not. It's really just the opinion of your boss and then their bosses and their bosses. So it becomes extremely political very quickly. And it's important that you toe the cultural line in an organization like that. You've just got to, right? You can't get ahead in your job if you don't. So, with respect to all of those people who do work within the ABC, obviously it's moved in the direction of a particular cultural way of thinking, which is perceived by those of us who are not left politically to be very left politically. One organisation that's been a strong and vocal and consistent critic of the ABC is the Institute for Public Affairs, an institution whose reputation is often maligned by the ABC in demonisation attempts. But the Institute of Public Affairs is nothing more than a think tank for classical liberal values and free market economics. And joining me right now is Evan Mulholland from the IPA. Evan, great to have you on the other side.
Thanks for having me.
So, mate, you have recently undertaken a documentary, several-part documentary on podcast. It's an audio documentary about the ABC. Tell us a little bit about that.
The documentary podcast is called Their ABC, What's Wrong with the ABC and How to Fix It. Now, it's called Their ABC because basically we know it's not ours. The ABC is a cultural institution, a cultural left-wing institution that really is against Australia. It's funded by us, and we pay for it to be this behemoth left-wing institution that doesn't like Australia, is obsessed with identity politics and climate change. It's biased against conservative viewpoints and conservative views in general. It's got this big inner city bias and regional bias, or bias against people in regional Australia and for people that work in industries in regional Australia. So what I thought we'd do is put together some of the biggest thinkers on the centre right and most prominent Australians on the centre right to talk about the ABC, the problems of the ABC, and how we go about fixing it. Because it's all good enough. The Liberals have been in power now for 7 or 8 years. They always say they don't like the ABC particularly much, but nothing ever seems to get done about it. So it features prominent Australians like Tony Abbott, Peter Credlin, John Anderson, Mark Latham, Janet Albrechtsen, Gemma Tognini, Rowan Dean. I could go on, and about 12 coalition MPs, all talking about their particular gripes with the ABC, but also how we go about fixing the ABC. Now, there's a lot of demonisation, I guess, of privatisation of the ABC, but we look at all options, reform options around the edges that would, curb social media activism and ideas like an independent ombudsman as well. But also looking at the idea of turning the ABC into a subscription service, because we know we've got countless subscription services in Netflix, Stan, Binge, Amazon, you name it. And the ABC even has one in iView. So if it wants to spend money on that, maybe we should actually look at what the ABC would look like as a subscription service in a metropolitan area as well. So all these ideas are explored, but we also go step by step, and there's a few episodes out already into its bias against conservatives. It's into its obsession with identity politics through its campaigns against Australia Day, its gender quotas, and it's, of course, its obsession with climate change activism, and go into how the ABC was caught out engaging in climate change activism. This week's episode will look at their recent social media scandals, including covering one of its most high-profile reporters, Louise Milligan, for personal tweeting. So it's definitely worth a listen, and it's really, hopefully, will push the boat out on the momentum for ABC reform.
Yeah, which is much needed, and I'm not going to go into sort of too much more than you've said about the ABC's bias. I think if people don't see the bias, then they're never going to see the bias. It would be because that's their worldview, so they can't see the bias. But if you have a different worldview, it is very apparent that that worldview is not getting equal airtime, and that the culture inside. I often talk about the culture inside the ABC, and the fact that every organisation does have a culture, and that reform of the ABC has to involve some kind of cultural shift. So you're going to need somebody to go in there and be very, very artful, or very, very radical and implementing breakthrough change to kind of really change. But it has to be called out. It has to, you have to first of all say, look, there's a cultural issue here. We need to be looking at these values as well as these values when we analyse issues, when we put together programming, and we have to give or attempt to give equal weighting to all the voices of Australians if we expect to continue to be funded by all Australians through the tax system. Otherwise, you can have your left-wing media outlet. You're just going to have to fund it yourselves, right?
Exactly. And you look at what Boris Johnson, even in the UK, is proposing, that the BBC, it's their version of a public broadcaster, but they're over there actually having a national conversation about the BBC licence fee, about turning the BBC into a subscription service, or, having it on your taxes every year that you can tick a box and pay a bit extra for the BBC. And I think giving Australians that choice is really important. Where we as taxpayers pay for the ABC, and the ABC as it stands is a big left-wing behemoth. And you spoke in your editorial about how the ABC in particular on the inside is very political, and you've got, lower management, middle management, and senior management. People have to get through to climb up the ranks of the ABC and even join the ABC as a employee. And you don't actually get very far unless you hold similar views to their worldview. And we actually look at whether the ABC's geographical location is a bulwark against it becoming more mainstream, because over and over again, with all the guests I've spoken to on this podcast, one of the most common things that has been said is that the further you get away from inner city, Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, the more mainstream the ABC becomes. That a lot of people actually have no qualms with the political coverage you get, in a say, New South Wales Southwest studio rather than ABC Ultimo, because the people in those communities, the ABC staff in those communities, actually have to get out in their community and live amongst them, and know that everyone's job
or in South Melbourne or South Brisbane. Yeah, exactly. It's so true. And I think one of the best things they've done is move some of the staff out west in Sydney, and we'll see what impact that maybe will have on the culture of the place. But
you also have to remember that even by moving 300 employees out to Penrith, still over half of all ABC's employees will be based at Sydney's Ultimo. So it's really, 300 staff out of over 4,000 is really a drop in the ocean. And, it's a piece.
And I'm sure it's the back office, so I don't think it'll be moving the leadership. They won't be moving the leadership to Penrith.
No.
It'll be the back office stuff, yeah. Hey, so this brings me to the conundrum that I have dealt with, and I know that you've got Senator James McGrath from the Queensland Liberal Party and top of the Queensland Senate ticket. He is. He has been a long time critic of the ABC. And when ScoMo scraped over the line in 2019, I personally breathed a bit of a sigh of relief and thought, Thank God that's the last election that we're going to have to battle against a $1 billion taxpayer-funded media monster that basically supports left-wing ideology, the Labor Party and the Greens, that we're actually going to be able to now reset the playing field properly. But these guys have been in power for a very long time, Evan, and we've seen very little action on the ABC. Why the fear? And why do we continuously support an organisation that has shown that it is not willing to reform, it's not interested in reform, and that it's definitely going to, continue to campaign for its own existence, of course, and try to paint anybody who tries to reform it as somebody who doesn't care about this very sacred Australian institution? Why are they so reluctant to do anything?
Exactly, and you're only going to move the boat on the ABC and shift the dial on the ABC if you keep talking about it. And that's one of the aims of this podcast. We've got to move the Overton window of what's electorally possible for the government to do. Unfortunately, a lot of people are afraid of the ABC. They see Get Up campaigning and Friends of the ABC and think, oh, no, it's all too hard. It's all too hard. And yet election after election still face this massive campaign against them from a taxpayer-funded broadcaster that their government is choosing to fund over $1.1 billion every year. And you mentioned Senator James McGrath, and this week's episode takes a deep dive into the 2019 election campaign, looked at the Blackburn review that James McGrath forced the ABC kicking and screaming to publish, and looks at it, it actually was biased towards Labor and the Greens, even the Greens. And at every point in the campaign, campaigned against the Liberal Party. We look at how the ABC followed Bob Brown's convoy of no consequence all the way up until the Galilee Basin, thinking that it was going to win over the people of Bowen to the wisdom of renewables. Case after case, election after election, we've seen the ABC become a campaigning unit for Labor, and that was a quote from Mark Latham on the podcast. And what the government should do is hash out a plan into how we can fix the ABC, how we can get it not as reliant on taxpayer funding. One of the ideas raised by a few people on the podcast is allow it to air advertising, because if it aired advertising, it might become more mainstream, because it's not just reliant on a big check every year to get its revenue. It has to actually be in touch with. Well, then it has
some accountability. I mean, this is the thing about the market, right? The market, they're not accountable to anybody except, as I said, to their bosses and what their bosses want. And that's like giving a small group of Australians with a particular worldview their own billion-dollar media toy to play with. I would like someone to give me $1 billion to play with, frankly, and see what we can do with our worldview with that $1 billion. I think we'd add a lot more value to the country than the ABC does, but I don't want to take anybody's money from taxpayers. That's not my thing. Look, I just find it fascinating, and I find it astounding that we have not, as a conservative, having a conservative government in place, that they have done so little to move on this issue. I think I posted something on Senator McGrath's Facebook page saying, last time I looked, my friend, you're in government. So what are you guys doing about it? Stop complaining and show some fortitude and take some risk here. Because I think there are a lot of Australians who are fed up with the ABC, and they're certainly the supporters of this government, and they would be able to convert many, many more if they were just brave enough to bite the bullet. Now, the defence of the ABC, if we look at the defence of the ABC, go ahead, yeah.
If I can also mention, the friends of the ABC, Get Up, and the ABC themselves will often point to these trust surveys about how the ABC is so trusted. And, this Roy Morgan survey says this, and this survey says this about the ABC. There was one survey that they usually promote every single year, which is the Roy Morgan Trusted Brand Survey. They didn't promote it this year, and I thought that was interesting. So I went in and had a look, and Roy Morgan's survey of trusted brands. In the last 2 years, the ABC's fallen from number 5 most trusted brand in Australia to number 19. And to quote Roy Morgan sociologist, risks falling out of the top 20 altogether. And they actually looked at their net rating score over the last 2 years, and it dives significantly in April of 2020. What happened then? The court case of Cardinal George Pell, where the ABC were proven to be on an absolute frolic of their own. Towards the end of last year, when they aired their Four Corners program on Christian Porter and Alan Tudge. And, of course, earlier this year as well, and mid this year, when they got into all sorts of scandals to do with their own making. So every time the ABC seems to have made itself the story, its trust is going down. And I don't think the government can be afraid of this idea that the ABC is somehow really trusted by Australians, because in fact it's sliding and it's not as trusted anymore.
So even if you are a weak political leader or a weak political party without any guts, and you do go by the polls, you should be reading these polls, because it's clearly showing that people are fed up with it, and they're certainly fed up paying for it. Evan, I wanted to just talk to you briefly about the fact that, it's very hard to change things at the ABC. It'd be very hard to organically change the culture there. It really does need sort of a significant clean out. And if the friends of the ABC are such friends of the ABC, well, they can pay for it. And if the ABC has such a terrific public trust rating, or used to, or if they claim that it still does, then they should have no problem or no fear about commercialising to a certain extent. But the devil's advocate position I'll just take for a moment. What people say about the ABC, well, public government should step in when there's a market failure. That's kind of classical liberal theory to a certain extent. But they say there's a market failure around quality journalism. You could argue that. I mean, the commercial television news is pretty god-awful. Maybe we need foreign correspondents, for example, because that's important for Australia's national security, that we have foreign correspondents. And so maybe we need a basic news service that attempts to be as neutral, but particularly for overseas news. The other thing that's often thrown up is we need services to the regions. Now, the services to the region, because it's not commercially viable, is the argument for commercial media to go out there. Services to the regions nowadays are probably not what they were, right, pre-internet. Do we need services to the regions? Is that a fair argument?
That is a fair argument, and it's actually something we explore in next week's episode of the podcast. But that's not to say that the government can't intervene in other ways. If the ABC was to be privatised, the government funds all sorts of things just in regional Australia. The government pays Telstra to run black spots, mobile phone, to put up mobile phone towers in black spots. It could do the same for regional news. And you have to say, when Telstra was privatised, it actually set regional service obligations on the company in order to service regional Australia. Yeah. So you could in turn privatise the ABC, but say, and give them some extra taxpayer money and say that you must service regional Australia. But if you look at the commercial market, there's never been more media. There's never been more news from different sources. And what's to say, people will often say, but the bushfire coverage, and the ABC does such a great job with that. I am absolutely certain commercial networks would love to bid for a emergency services tender put out by the government to cover those kind of natural disasters and things like that. So there are reform options that are possible, things that we already do with other telcos and the like, that we can do for the ABC. Because, as I said before, people don't mind the ABC or in the regions. It's actually more mainstream than you would get in the inner city. So one of the ideas that I believe it was Matt Canavan that proposed in the podcast is to split the ABC, have a separate regional broadcaster, and then have the metropolitan ABC be a subscription service, or an opt-in on your tax return. There's lots of ideas that we can get past, and no one is afraid to get it. They'll hit they'll hit you with a regional argument, with all these other arguments, or there's trust arguments, but it actually needs courageous people to push back and say, well, that's not quite the case, and here's the policy solution.
Yeah, well, that universal service obligation, they used to call it at Telstra, they had an obligation to ensure that every Australian had access to a telephone. That was part of the deal of the privatisation of Telstra. And that model worked, and I think we could probably do the same thing with the ABC. But what I find interesting also, and I've said this a couple of times on the podcast, Evan, is that people forget that the ABC is a barrier to entry for other broadcasters. So, for example, I often go back to this case of, I think it was Daily Mirror Group, DMG, in London, Nova FM. In its first incarnation, Nova FM, the concept for those radio licenses, those FM radio licenses that DMG won back in I think it was the 90s or the early 2000s, was that they wanted to do an adult ABC style, sort of more middle of the road talk, semi-talk, semi-music sort of ABC format in the commercial sense. So they launched radio stations in Sydney and Melbourne called Vega FM, VEGA, Vega FM. They got a whole lot of ex-ABC presenters, and it had that real, nice sort of ABC feel. And it just collapsed. Why? Because you can't compete with commercial free. How can any market entrant hope to be successful against a government-funded monolith that it doesn't have to run ads to support itself? And you've got to, every hour, you've got to put 12 minutes of ads in to make your business viable, and you're up against a competitor who doesn't. So I think there's an ACCC case. I wonder why no one's ever taken it to the ACCC.
This is an issue that quite a number of coalition MPs that I spoke to are actually concerned about and are pushing for reform on,
right,
whether it be legislative reform or action, as you mentioned, because we've seen, inquiry after inquiry where other media organisations have spoken about the ABC's influence on this. It's the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age basically called it theft, because what the ABC does in multiple areas, but particularly in its online, it will buy up Google AdWords and Google advertising so that its stories are the first thing that comes up when you go searching for news. Now, the ABC doesn't rely on those clicks for revenue. So what it's essentially doing is putting itself over businesses that do. It's thieving from journalists that actually need those clicks to get paid every day to put dinner on the table. There is no business case to why the ABC should be doing that. I agree with the Age and SMH. They are stealing.
Well, the other thing is what that's the problem with all of these, surveys into the ABC showing, how much value it brings and how wonderful it is what they're not measuring. Right? They're not measuring who they don't have on the ABC. They're not measuring the voices that the ABC is ignoring, right? They're not measuring the impact that the ABC is having on journalism and the development of journalism in the country, because people can't set up businesses and news organisations out in the sticks and make them economically viable because they're up against this ABC monster. Who knows? We might have even better bushfire coverage if we commercialise the whole thing. I think we probably would. So there's all these factors that you've got to consider that are in the realm of what isn't happening because we have an ABC. What isn't happening, another argument you often have heard, I'm sure, is that, who's going to look after the arts in Australia? We'll just descend into this commercial hell in terms of the arts. There won't be anybody fostering non-commercially viable art and creativity. Well, is that the case? Or would it bring great benefit to the arts if it was funded by other sources, direct government funding, or perhaps
I've got to jump in there, Damian, because the ABC says, and their friends will say, that they cover the arts. I used to run a theatre company back in the day, and I would love for the ABC to do, documentaries or an insight into grassroots community organisations or community theatre companies or arts groups, but it's always about the particular art that has a particular political slant as well, that relates to their own cultural identity and all sorts of identity politics agenda in there. So, for them to say that, without the ABC, the arts will be destroyed in Australia, I don't buy it. With the emergence of streaming services in Australia, the amount of Australian dramas that are being created at the moment is just, we've never seen that before. So I don't buy that, without the ABC, it will be a Australian dramaless world or artsless world. It's just what a rubbish argument.
It is a bit of a rubbish argument, and it only supports the sort of art that a lot of people are perhaps not that into, and that's fine. Look, I mean, people are allowed to have all this. I'm not suggesting that we need to, everything needs to be funneled through them up, but we can't take money out of people's pockets, taxpayers' pockets, and channel it into directions that a small group of elites decide are the appropriate artistic channels. It's really, I put it in the realm of the unethical and the immoral. I go beyond, just saying that it's not fair. I think it's actually the morality of it is highly questionable. I think deep down in their hearts, most of the people at the ABC know that. And when they probably secretly wrestle with that, but they don't want to give up their power and all the suffering and sucking up they've done for decades to get where they are. Yep. One of the other things I'm interested to hear what you've heard about the culture of the ABC and the way it's changed over the years. But I remember when I was working there back in the late 80s, and I was a youngster, and I was a little bit of an opinionated and a little bit left in those days, I suppose, probably centre left. But we had mature grown-ups in the room that balanced us out and pulled us into line, because the ABC had a fairly conservative history and conservative element to it. So it was kind of more balanced in those days. Whereas when I look at ABC management today, it's like a roster of everybody who worked for Triple J in the 1980s and hasn't found the exit door yet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so they really become captured by the ABC, and you also see it with board members. You see it with management. There was a lot of hope for Ida Buttrose when she went into the ABC, and she came out saying that she wanted more diversity of voices on the ABC. But then all of a sudden, a couple of months later, she's asked about it on the ABC, and she actually meant ethnic diversity or diversity of the identity politics style that they like. But she said she wouldn't hire someone like Andrew Bolt. That wouldn't be appropriate for the ABC. Yet it's completely appropriate for them to have people like Jonathan Green and Fran Kelly, who are completely of a green left viewpoint. So you're completely right. It's just,
and the staff of the current Four Corners crowd. Yeah, I mean, they couldn't get more ideologically left.
Exactly.
Than that,
and we've seen some people that have tried to clean it up fail over the years. And even recently we saw the resignation of Gavin Morris. And, while he had his critics, he's someone that's come out and said, perhaps the ABC does have an issue that we do seem like we're too inner city elite or have that viewpoint. So I think he was someone that definitely tried to make a dent in that regard. But, he tried, and all of a sudden he's gone. What a coincidence.
Oh, look, if you know anything about organizational psychology, that sort of environment will eat anybody alive. It'll a particular senator who I won't mention did say to me once that, the ABC eats anyone that the Liberal Party puts on the board. And captures them. Yep. so I think you've got to you have to have a political force and a party behind you that's going to support you to make the change. I
can provide just one example to that. A few weeks ago in the Sydney Morning Herald, its board member Joe Gersh, who was appointed by this government, wrote an article criticising my podcast without even listening to it, but he'd seen the quote from Tony Abbott that the ABC takes everyone's side but ours, and that if we're in this is Tony Abbott's comments, if we're in a dispute with another country, the ABC usually takes that country's side and assumes that we've done something wrong. Now, he said those comments were factually inaccurate, and an insult to all staff. But when you look at the events over the past week and the way the ABC has behaved with the dispute with Emmanuel Macron, Tony Abbott looks like quite the prophet, because is actually what he was right, and that ABC board member was completely wrong. The ABC have shown him up to be wrong in this case, because the ABC was taking the French's side. It was campaigning against Australia's position in a dispute with France. And really, is that something we really want a public broadcaster to do? I don't care if The Guardian goes out there and criticises the Australian government point of view, but with our money, is that really appropriate? I don't think so.
Evan, thanks so much for talking to us. I'm going to be listening to the podcast. Tell people how they can find it.
People can head to www.ipa.org.au/Their ABC and sign up to figure out how you can get a It's Their ABC bumper sticker. I am sick of seeing our ABC or Save Our ABC or Don't Sell the ABC bumper stickers around, inner city Melbourne or inner city Sydney. So you can get your It's Their ABC bumper sticker to show everyone on the road that it is truly their ABC.
Good on you, Evan. Thanks very much for joining us and for the work that you're doing. Let's hope that 2022 becomes the year that we reform Channel 2.
No worries. Thanks, Damon. Cheers.
As I mentioned earlier, The Other Side will be sadly leaving the Discernable platform at the end of 2021, hopefully returning somewhere in 2022 after the election on our own platforms, in which I'll be now running in the federal election, of course, as a Liberal Democrats candidate for the seat of Ryan in Brisbane. And I'm running to win, because we have to bring real experience from outside of the political inner circle of Canberra elites to save this country. During the election campaign, I'll be posting lots of random short videos and commenting on stuff. So right now, if you'd please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Other Side Oz, and or on Facebook at facebook.com/TheOtherSideOz, or just search us up. Then be sure to click follow on Twitter to follow us, and like on the Facebook page. The Facebook page looks like this. Now, we do strongly recommend that you continue to follow Discernible. Matt's still going to be producing some great stuff on both YouTube and Facebook. But if you're landing on a page that says Discernible, it isn't actually The Other Side anymore. So we do need you to go onto our own separate page. So you've got to find those pages. Be sure to stay in touch with me throughout 2022. It's going to be a lot of fun. During the campaign, I'll be posting behind the scenes stuff so you can see what a campaign is like. And then if you could kindly subscribe to us on YouTube, our YouTube page looks like this one. And again, you need to find our page, not our folder on the Discernible page. You've got to find the Other Side Australia page and subscribe directly to that, and click the bell so you get notified when we put up new content. I really look forward to keeping in touch throughout 2022. And don't forget that you can always join our VIP WhatsApp list and have links sent to your phone when I upload new content. Just drop us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost@gmail.com, and we'll send you the link to opt in on WhatsApp. Written and authorised by Damian Coory from Toowong, Queensland.